Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone who's present here in the room and to all who are watching online. Thank you for coming. My name is Jack Lance. I'm the Director of Music and Worship Arts here at LCPC. Today's concert is in two parts. The first half is dedicated to the members and friends of LCPC who have passed recently. The second half salutes one of our outreach ministries. This is one of our partners called Restoring Hope that serves needy children in South India. All of the music, however, is by George Friedrich Handel, and in the next 25 minutes, I will discuss the inspiration and construction of these musical works and their significance for us today. These Handel works give us hope through Jesus' resurrection, and provide models and inspiration for our outreach ministries to others. George Friedrich Handel was the most popular and most famous musician of his time, not only in London and Great Britain, but throughout the European continent. From his coronation anthems to some of the greatest works of public spectacle ever created, Handel had become nothing short of the architect of British musical sensibility. But like most of us, George Friedrich Handel grew and matured through multiple stages in his musical life. He began as an organist and composer in Halle, what is today Eastern Germany, moving to Italy to compose Italian opera, and finally moving to London as both a court composer and musical impresario, producing first Italian opera, such as Rinaldo and Agrippina, and later biblically based oratorios, such as Israel in Egypt, Samson, Judas Maccabeus, and of course his masterpiece, Messiah. Later in his life, the Concerts for Charity at London's Foundling Hospital provided a regular occasion for public adulation unlike anything Handel had ever experienced. His late music was inseparable from a charitable cause as well as moral sensibility. First, Handel as court composer in Germany and England. Handel's relationship with the Prince Elector of Hanover, who later became George I of England, was complex initially. Handel served as Kapellmeister for the Prince Elector in Hanover, in what we now call Germany. However, both the Prince Elector and Handel frequently traveled to London, and after Queen Anne's death in 1714, the Prince Elector of Hanover ascended the British throne as George I, where Handel continued to serve him. George I died in 1727, and he was succeeded by his son, who became George II, whom Handel also continued to serve. Handel spent so much time in London that in 1727 he became a naturalized British subject, further solidifying his connection to the British court and the monarchy. While there, Handel wrote music for coronations, weddings, funerals, celebrations, including multiple Te Deums for Victory, royal fireworks music that we performed several years ago to celebrate the peace of Aix-la-Chapelle, and much more. His water music was composed for King George I and is on our program this afternoon. The second face of Handel is as a sacred music composer. Handel served the church, composing organ works, choir anthems, instrumental and choral music for Protestant worship, funerals, weddings, various church events, including the funeral music for Queen Caroline, wife of George II, which is on our program this afternoon, and through which we will salute Our Saints of LCPC. Handel's biblically based oratorios, Saul, Israel, Egypt, Esther, Samson, etc., and of course Messiah, served Bible stories in a secular setting. In a way, they were great outreach, serving them to a piously Christian audience and some curious onlookers in a way that I would argue helped create the Protestant identity of Great Britain. The third face of Handel is as a philanthropist composer. In later life, Handel became a philanthropist, writing music and conducting music for charity. In fact, the Dublin premiere of Messiah was a charity event. It benefited Mercer's Hospital, the Charitable Infirmary, and relief for debtors in the city's prisons. It raised money to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and foster the orphan. And I'll, in a few minutes, talk about Handel's generosity to London's Foundling Hospital. Handel's music was inseparable from a cause, as well as a moral sensibility. He helped indigent children, granting them the real tangibility of hope. After the London premiere of Messiah in 1743, Handel is quoted as having told a noble patron, quote, "My lord, I should be sorry if I only entertained the audience. I wished to make them better." This quotation may be a later invention, but to his listeners, the story came to express something real, something beyond just the music itself. Handel's music was expected to make people better. They came expecting something good to come of their experience. In 1750, after the initiation of the annual performances in support of the Foundling Hospital, Messiah became indelibly associated with national ideals of charity. And this afternoon, we shall present excerpts from Messiah and the complete Foundling Hospital anthem. As most of us here have visited London and experienced the hot, humid summers. Thus, water parties became as popular as opera in Baroque Europe. The fame of Handel's water music makes King George I's pleasure trip up the Thames aboard the royal barge on July 17, 1717 seem somewhat exceptional, but that was hardly the case. Pleasure boats, water music abounded at the royal courts of the age. One ruler in German-speaking Central Europe, with an abundance of time on his hands and lots of cash in his coffers, built miles of canals for water parties and mock naval battles. But of course, none of these princes had a composer of Handel's stature in his service. Handel composed 3 suites of water music, just shy of an hour's worth in total, for a royal water party in 1717. Our program today includes 2 suites from Handel's water music. We know there were royal parties on the Thames in the summers of 1715, 16, and 17, and Handel probably provided music for those, but the only account that mentions him is a letter from Friedrich Bonnet, a Prussian diplomat, describing a party on this July 17, 1717 that I mentioned. I'm quoting Mr. Bonnet. At about 8 evening, the king repaired to his barge. Next to the king's barge was that of musicians, about 50 in number, trumpets, horns, oboes, German flutes, that's transverse flutes like we use today, French flutes, which were recorders, violins, basses, but no singers. Music had been composed specially by the famous Handel, a native of Halle, and His Majesty's principal court composer. His Majesty's approval of it was so great that he caused it to be played 3 times in all, twice before and once after supper, even though each performance lasted an hour. The evening was as fine as could be desired for this occasion, and the number of barges and boats full of people wanting to listen was beyond counting. And this painting is an example of a painter of that period depicting these water parties in the Thames. Turning to the funeral anthem for Queen Caroline. Queen Caroline was the consort of George II. She'd been a friend and a patron to Handel for more than 30 years when she died in 1737. She was an accomplished amateur musician herself. She took a lively interest in artistic and intellectual matters and was widely mourned at her death. Queen Caroline was buried in Westminster Abbey on the evening of December 17, 1737. Handel's anthem was performed in the Abbey by nearly 80 vocal performers and 100 instrumentalists. They were comprised of people from His Majesty's Band and from the Royal Opera. The funeral anthem text was chosen by the subdean of Westminster Abbey, a man named Edward Willis, mostly from Old Testament books of Lamentations and Job. Today we're presenting 3 movements from this lengthy work. The subtitle of the work is "The Ways of Zion Do Mourn, and She is in Bitterness. All her people sigh and hang down their heads to the ground." Handel's music underscores this textual message so well. Listen in one of the movements for the choir repeating, "Sigh, sigh, sigh." I think it's appropriate for the All Saints recognition section of today's concert. Turning to the Foundling Hospital and Handel's connection with it and Messiah. Handel performed Messiah more frequently than any other oratorio he ever composed, 36 times in total, most of them after the age of 60. In fact, it was the last concert he attended 2 weeks before his death. But for many of his admirers, the Foundling Hospital concerts were what made Messiah his greatest creation. Facts so seemingly obvious that the details warranted a mention by the composer himself. Here, with only a hint of ego, Handel wrote to his friend John Mainwaring, and I quote, "Messiah was established as the favorite oratorio, so that it may truly be affirmed that one of the noblest and most extensive charities that ever was planned by the wisdom or projected by the piety of men in some degree owes its continuance as well as prosperity to the patronage of Handel." Words of Handel about Handel. Okay. We're presenting 4 excerpts from Messiah, and I've chosen these because they express the hope we find in Jesus' resurrection and confidence in life eternal. Now, turning to the music of the second half of the concert, the Foundling Hospital Anthem. This music is tied inextricably to London's Foundling Hospital. But first, let me tell you a little bit about this large enterprise. You can see from this contemporaneous painting that it was a large building. First, the rather unwieldy title of the hospital, the official title was the Foundling Hospital for the Maintenance and Education of Exposed and Deserted Young Children. It was founded in 1741 in a temporary house following 10 years of work by a philanthropist named Thomas Coram. The first stone of the permanent facility, which is depicted here, was laid in 1742. But interesting, this was a very advanced hospital for the time because priority was given for maintaining a clean and disinfected environment. In fact, the foundling hospital developed the first smallpox vaccine. And all children, both boys and girls, were taught a trade before being released, normally between the ages of 13 and 16. And if you've read Oliver Twist, the hospital's referenced in Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist. The founder, Thomas Coram, he was painted by William Hogarth in 1740, and this painting is on display today in the Foundling Hospital Museum. Thomas Coram had a career as a captain of a merchant ship, which he inherited from his father. He was a lifelong philanthropist who was shocked by the sight of infants dying in the streets, having been thrown out by their impoverished parents. And by the way, Coram briefly lived in Taunton, Massachusetts, where he donated land for the first school built in that city. To illustrate the plight of London's poor and needy, including street orphans, William Hogarth, who was also a foundling hospital benefactor, created paintings and etchings to raise people's attention and raise money to take care of these kids. Again, as I mentioned, the hospital was quite large. It consists of 2 major wings and a connecting chapel, which was built around an open courtyard for the children to play in. The West Wing was completed in 1745, and children were moved from temporary housing to there. The East Wing was completed in 1752 so that girls could be kept separate from boys. But to be admitted was a challenge. Mothers could bring the children for whom they could not care for, or in some cases didn't want, or people could find children abandoned on the streets and bring them and petition for admission. But there were rules. Only healthy children who were under the age of 2 were accepted, including children of all races and origins. Demand for the hospital was so great that by the late 1750s, applications rose to 4,000 per year, far above the facility's capacity. This picture is a picture of petitioners trying to get a child admitted to the hospital. The demand was so large that a lottery system was developed to control the admissions, and public lotteries were conducted on Saturday mornings. The petitioner could bring a child and draw either a red, a white, or a black ball from a bingo-like machine. The lotteries were so newsworthy that news media personnel were present and reported the results in their newspapers. When kids were admitted, they were given new identities and baptized with new names. But a system of identity tracing was later instituted that enabled mothers to use various tokens which were stored away in case the mother was able to reclaim and care for her child in the future. Of course, she had to identify the token at the time. Here are some examples. And if you visit the Foundling Hospital Museum, you can see cases of these tokens on display. Handel first became associated with a foundling hospital in 1749. He produced and conducted a benefit concert of selections from his music. And the following year, he gave the hospital an organ for its chapel, and in appreciation, he was made governor of the hospital. The benefit performance he planned in 1750 of Messiah to inaugurate the organ proved to be the first of an annual series he himself conducted through 1753, and for the rest of his life, authorized by being present for every concert. These concerts continued for another 25 years. But the first concert is the one for us today. It was given on May 27, 1749, in an unfinished chapel. In fact, there was no glass in the windows. So the windows opened to the outside, probably very hot and humid air. Handel recruited over 100 voices and performers to perform the concert, and he conducted it himself. It was a sellout. In fact, it was so successful that the annual concerts were inspired by this initial one. The concert included people from every stratum of London society, including the Prince and Princess of Wales, who, as a result of the concert, donated £2,000 to the hospital. It's equivalent of about £1.5 million today. Chapel was not completed until April 1743, and they repeated the Foundling Hospital anthem again for that celebration. In 1749, characteristically, Handel was pretty busy writing music for a number of events. And so in the Foundling Hospital anthem, he borrowed from his other works. He took two movements from this funeral music for Queen Caroline that I mentioned before. So we are not going to do those two movements twice today and bore you. We're just doing the two that are in the Foundling Hospital anthem, not the two that are in the funeral anthem. One movement he borrowed from the Italian composer Antonio Lotti, and the final movement is something you will all recognize. It's a very familiar movement from Messiah. So during the 1750s and 60s, this Foundling Hospital annual musical festival of Messiah became the hit event of the London social season. Thousands and thousands of pounds, millions and millions of contemporary dollars or pounds were raised for the hospital, and the hospital really flourished as a result of this. And Handel himself led the concerts for the first few years, conducting from the keyboard, and later he ceded that responsibility to the chapel organist, a guy named John Christopher Smith. The concerts brought so much attention to the chapel that people, tourists visiting London, would come for worship in the chapel and offer to buy a pew so they could reserve a pew for themselves. As a final act of generosity to the hospital, Handel left in his will a clean copy of Messiah, full score and parts. This picture is not of Messiah, but of his will, handwritten by Handel himself. The score and parts were delivered to the hospital 3 weeks after Handel's death, and samples of them can still be seen on display in the museum today. Paulette and I visited there and viewed them in August. I recommend those visiting London take time to visit the Foundling Hospital Museum. It's only a couple blocks from the British Museum and also a couple blocks from Charles Dickens Museum. Both of them are good places to visit as well. Picture in this next slide is of Coram. Remember, Thomas Coram is the founder of the Foundling Hospital. This is a contemporary picture that I took on our visit in August. The charity continues today, continues to raise money to take care of orphans and impoverished children. It's the longest running children's charity in Europe. Coram works to provide better chances for children, young people, and they continue to produce concerts of Handel's music, including one on his birthday every February. In fact, one of our guides in the museum said, we don't get too many Americans here visiting because they don't know about us. Why are you visiting? And I explained this concert today, and we were going to do Foundling Hospital anthems. And then she proceeded to sing a tune from one of the movements. She obviously had done it as part of their Handel birthday concerts. Charles King, who's author of Every Valley, the story of Handel's Messiah, published just last year, suggests that the work of music we now call Handel's Messiah has a good claim to being the greatest piece of participatory art ever created. Over 250 years after it was first performed, the Hallelujah Chorus from Messiah remains one of the best-known pieces of Western choral music. It's joyful, it's hopeful, it's uplifting, it's instantly recognizable, and it also has an intimate connection with the Foundling Hospital because Handel chose the Hallelujah Chorus as the last movement of his Foundling Hospital anthem. At the time, it was the year before anybody in London knew anything about Messiah or had heard Hallelujah Chorus, so he borrowed his own music, and it highlights the conclusion, and you will hear it today at the end. Please feel free to sing along. I think the Hallelujah Chorus highlights the powerful effect music can have on both listeners and performers, together or alone, and it's the potential for music to create emotional connections that inspire social change, and which is why we produce music in the church. So I'd like to invite the choir and orchestra to join me so we can produce this music for you. Thanks again for coming.